Welcome back to the Lehigh Valley Arts Podcast, where we will explore the local arts, culture, and community in the Lehigh Valley. We'll be doing this through conversations with individual artists, administrators, and organizations. We'll discuss all types of mediums with the goal of enriching local arts culture.
Welcome back to Lehigh Valley Arts Podcast. I'm Elise.
I'm Ben.
I'm Elizabeth.
This past weekend, we all had the opportunity to visit a performance as part of Festival Unbound by Touchstone Theater. Thank you guys for coming to that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
That was awesome. I had the pleasure of helping out with that event, helping to coordinate some of the accommodations that were provided, including the ASL interpreters and the cart captioning. And what else was there? Audio describer.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
You did a lot. We just sat people down.
That was very helpful. Thank you for your volunteer
You're
time.
welcome. Oh, and I got the internet working.
Yeah, that was great.
Oh,
Thank you
yeah.
for that.
Internet.
Yeah. Touchstone Theater runs this amazing arts festival. This is, I think, was the third one.
Third one, yeah.
Called Festival Unbound. So if you want to learn more about it, you should definitely look it up on their website.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed the event. There were many components to it.
There were.
Including, let me see, I have them all written down because I don't want to miss anything. There were 2 films that were presented by Kinetic Light, which is a wheelchair-based dance choreography troupe. There was a panel discussion with local artists and arts administrators talking about the power of accessibility in arts organizations and art spaces. And then there was a play directed by local director Randall Forte.
Yeah. After the Kinetic Light played, the films that they played from there, I loved the Q&A session with the individual who was involved from there. What was her name?
Alice Shepard.
Alice, yes. Yeah, she did a really good job. And I loved that when it came to having the other artists that were local there, she was involved in that panel discussion as well. That was super cool.
Yeah, she zoomed in for the panel, so that was really awesome.
Yeah.
And talked a lot about, she is a person with a disability as well and is the director of this dance troupe, and talked a lot about just her challenges navigating everyday life, but then also using art to represent herself and her disability. So that was a really cool integration into that art event.
Yeah.
That was really cool. It was really neat too to have local artists out front before they came. Before you even came into the show as a whole. I guess you would call it a show.
Yeah.
As a whole. And one of the artists, Anne, I don't remember her last name.
Anne Leibowitz.
Yes. She was doing a really neat community-based project about what you're thankful for, essentially, and like what that means to you. And you would write it down on these pieces that she had already made, papers out of different materials and paintings and other kind of forms of media in that sense. And that was really neat to see it all come together because she made it into a big quilt, essentially. It's like a community quilt, and I don't know where it's displaying at the moment, but I think she finished it.
Yeah, so there was like a culminating event at the end of the festival that they used the quilt for.
Also, a shout out to Michael Freeman, who is also one of our very first guests, actually, on the show in our first season. He was displaying some of his work there, and he was actually able to be a part of the panel, which was really awesome to hear his opinions on, art in the community and how it's affected his life and how it's affected the community as a whole. So that was really neat to see him on that stage and platform.
He was great.
He was very well spoken.
Good job, Michael.
Yeah, great job. Which brings us to our interview for today, which is with Randall Forte, who directed Room for Rent, and that played at Festival Unbound. Elise, do you want to take it away with his bio?
Absolutely. Randall Forte retired in January as the executive director from the Lehigh Valley Arts Council, having served for nearly 22 years in that position. During his tenure, he led many regional research projects and public forums that promoted arts awareness, advocated its value, and expanded access. Among them included 5 economic impact studies, the Arts and Access Always program, cooperative arts marketing initiatives, the Young at Art Expo, and the Art Takes Passport to the Arts. Prior to his career as an arts administrator, Forte was a professional actor and director and still maintains his membership in the Actors Equity and the Screen Actors Guild. Randall's most recent project, which was performed at the Ice House during Festival Unbound, was titled Room for Rent. These characters carry a sense of loss, looking for direction, purpose, and connection. Is life just a room for rent? Nothing is permanent. We spend our brief lives on Earth sharing space in a room that is hopefully safe and provides joy and meaning, seeking a sense of belonging. Randall, thank you very much for coming in today.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's lovely to have you here in the studio. We've been talking about this for a little while, so I'm glad it's finally happening.
Yes, thanks.
Very good. Well, I think we should jump right in. You have, as your bio said, an extremely impressive, very extensive experience in the arts industry.
I didn't say it was impressive.
I said it was
impressive.
How did you get your start?
In school, growing up, I went to a Jesuit high school. It was an all-boys high school. So trying out for a play at the all-girls high school was a way of meeting girls. I did a production of The Miracle Worker at one of the sister schools. And college, I was started off as a history major, and pretty quickly segued into theater, as a speech and theater major. Went to the University of Michigan, which was an exciting time to go to school because it was during the Vietnam War, and a lot of a lot of actors had come back to earn their graduate degrees. And they were looking for jobs in the theater, something that they could raise families with and stuff. And so as an undergraduate, I was working with some incredible talent because they were seasoned, had experience. So the first play I did was Gilda Radner was in, which was a real hoot because she was hysterical. And of course she didn't have the renown she grew to have. But I say that only as an example of the kind of talent that was at the school. And the teachers were all right, but you learned a lot by working with a lot of these graduate students that were in their early 30s, late 30s. So they were pretty seasoned.
Yeah, that's very cool. That's a very immersive arts education to kind of jump right into it.
Yeah, my dad was a professional trumpet player, and he was really obsessed with music, but he could not make a living at it. So he put away his horn and never picked it up again. And he had 5 kids. You would have thought one of us would have had some musical experience or talent, but he unfortunately made the decision, dissuaded any of us from taking music because he had such a difficult time, with the career. And here I ended up in the theater, so I guess I can give him credit for that.
Absolutely. After college, what was the kind of path into theater for you?
I left college. I didn't finish my degree, then went back and finished after a year. I wasn't sure, I had a lot of doubts about whether I should go into theater or not, but I took a year off, worked, and just was miserable without doing theater. So I went back and finished my degree. Tried to get into a graduate program at Wayne State University, which they have the Hilberry program. It's a repertory program, so they're doing 2 to 3 plays in rep, and did not get into that, and was auditioning for a number of local theaters in the Detroit area, and managed to get my equity card in 1983, 1981 actually. So I'm a member of Actors Equity in the Screen Actors Guild, and that was an honor to be part of that union. You were the contracts that you were offered were paying contracts.
That's ideal.
Yeah, I mean, I'm proud to say I have a pension from Actors Equity. I was vested in over a period of 12 years. I worked with equity contracts, so I got my number of weeks that I needed. So it's not a lot, but it's, and it's something, and it's a validation of my career pursuit, which I really appreciate.
Absolutely.
And then my wife and I moved to the Allentown area from Michigan after she finished her she took her MFA at the Hillberry.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought we would eventually move to New York, but it just, when we started looking for a place to live, we found ourselves further and further outside of the city. And we were expecting our first child. And John had some complications, and so we decided to stay put until the baby was born, and we did. And then this job opened up at Kutztown University, a costume designer position, which is what she had intended to do, was to teach. She started graduate school 3 days after we were married. It was a 2-year program. It was pretty intense. But she was a costume designer at Kutztown University for close to 30 years. And when the kids were young, I would go back to Michigan, and I had some connections still there, and I would either act or direct. And then, but as the kids got older, I couldn't leave Johanna to raise the kids. So a job opened up at Northampton Community College, and I directed a play a year there for 13 years. And that was fun because I was able to pretty much choose what I would like to direct. And working at a community college, you have actors from all different ages, so you're able to cast, someone who's 40. You're able to cast a 40-year-old, which is nice. So I mean, and my kids grew up backstage,
Cool.
So they're great arts patrons, but they run as far away from the arts as possible. And it was too much. I think they witnessed it as an incredible struggle. And so they've chosen other careers. My daughter's an attorney, and my son is a chemist. So they're great art supporters. In fact, my son and his wife came to see the play I recently directed.
Oh, cool.
They live in Philly, and so they came out for the afternoon, which was nice.
That's nice.
I don't think my daughter-in-law had seen anything of my theatrical pursuits because I hadn't been doing it for 20 years when I took on the position at the Lehigh Valley Arts Council.
Wow, that's very cool. That's neat that they got to come up and see that.
Yeah, it was.
First one in 20-some years.
So we were both at the performance of Room for Rent this past weekend.
Oh, was it the past weekend? Wow. It was like so long ago. It was really encouraging to see all the different aspects as accessibility there that day, from the closed captioning to being able to have the FM systems and just the entirety of the play itself. It was really neat to be able to see, and and the interpreters, of course, as well. That in of itself is such a lack. There's such a lack of presence in this area. So it was really cool to see that you were able to incorporate all of those with the help of Festival Unbound and Touchstone, of course. But that was really neat.
It was a great opportunity to tell some stories about this community. I mean, the story of a family, living with a person with a disability is, not only the story about the person with the disability, but the mom and the dad and the brothers and the sisters and all the complications that they face. So I was pleased that this particular play told that story. Yeah. I mean, it was about aging and a man who was in his early 70s having arthritis in his legs and having lost his wife within the past decade and living alone in his home, and his daughter coming on a weekly basis to give him groceries and to do things for him. But the daughter recognizing the fact that he's aging and, concerned about the fact that he will be safe. So, I mean, it affects, the person without the disability as well. It was important to me also to work with people who had a sensitivity towards disabilities. The actress who played the daughter, Susan, Roseanne D'Amico Shatowski grew up with a father who was blind. She was his audio describer. She has a son who has MS. So, I mean, she lives this life. She understands it completely. And the gentleman playing Walt, the 73-year-old, he has a hearing impairment setting on, like most people in their 70s. I can attest to that. And I have Parkinson's, which carries with it certain challenges. One of which is I tire very easily, so I have to be careful about pacing myself. But I thought the play was an exciting one to do. Interestingly enough, it's a 30-year-old play, which I had directed 30 years ago at Muhlenberg College.
Oh, that's cool.
And there had been talk when I had been offered, the director role as far as putting together the making our world, a day of access, if you will, about doing an original piece, a devised piece. There wasn't enough time to create something in the schedule, but I remembered this piece, and I called the playwright. He's a pastor at St. Timothy, I think, Lutheran Church in North or South Carolina, and asked him about whether he would be interested in rewriting it, because it really would need to be updated. And I told him, I said, two of the most important issues facing our country now are racial inequality and COVID, the pandemic. And these would have to be very much a part of the play. And I asked him, I said, I'd like to, the young girl in the play, I would like her to be a person of color. I think that would make for an interesting dynamic as far as the two characters, but also for the audience, because it was a suburban neighborhood and there were issues of systemic racism in the play. So I thought we were tackling some relevant issues.
Absolutely.
And that was important to me. It was also important to me that the remainder of the programming of the festival have access to accommodations for their audiences as well. There's a limit to how much you can do over the course of 5 days, but we at least addressed it. And so I mean, there were a lot of people who were exposed to accommodations in a way that they never had been before, which surprised me, actually.
Yes.
Because Elise knows we've been doing this since 2013, and we had the Arts Council had a program, Arts and Access Always. They still have a program, I guess. And we spent a year developing a program of producing some 45 theatrical artistic events, so including poetry readings by a blind poet, dance classes for Parkinson's patients, theater productions, children's productions as well. The IU 20 had their students with deafness participate in a workshop with a classical quartet.
Yes.
And it was exciting the way the piece, the year came together, and how positive people were about what they attended.
Right. Going back to the play, Room for Rent, you just mentioned and had mentioned during the day of that there was a writer for this play that you had approached about kind of rewriting some of the dialogue or recasting some of the characters. What does that process usually look like? Because in some cases for performance pieces, the writer is the director. And in some cases, it's similar to this situation where there is an opportunity to kind of modernize a piece, if that's the right word. So what does that process look like?
Generally, I don't think writers direct their own work.
Really?
I don't think they should.
That's fair.
I think they're too close to it in some instances. But circumstances, if there's no director, then they have to. And sometimes they, depending on the writer, can get impatient with actors not arriving at the truth of a situation. But I always have to remind them that it took them X amount of days to arrive at the truth. So the actors need time to explore and to.
Yeah.
You can't judge their initial response to the play. So it was exciting because John, I mean, I told him he wrote something and I would read it. I would give him my feedback and I'd say, can you solve this? And he would send something back to me, and together we sort of worked on making it happen. I mean, even once we went into rehearsals, there were some small changes made, little line, word changes or line changes. But for the most part, the play had been set when we went into rehearsal. And then the actors had some input as well if they were having difficulty with something. There was a section in the play, if you remember correctly, where there's an argument between the prospective tenant, the young girl, and the old man, and he ends up falling. And they were having difficulty with that section. And what I realized was that there was a monologue practically being given by the young actress, and then the older man was listened to it, and then he would respond with his share of the monologue. They weren't long though,
right?
So I broke it up into dialogue. This is, you say these two words, these two sentences. And then your response will be these two sentences, because they were responses to what was being delivered,
right?
But they weren't playing. The actors felt frozen because they had to stop. So we just turned it into more of a dialogue, and that was helpful. Occasionally we did that with other sections of the piece, and the playwright was fine with that.
I wanted to ask about just the kind of process of working with actors who either have experience or don't have as much experience, and what their comfort level is in giving feedback on script, or what the process of working with an actor in a stage play is like. You guys had not a ton of time to prepare.
We started rehearsals on September 13th. Now, I had given them the script once they were cast. But the part of Susan, I was having a difficult time casting. So she came in just prior, like on the 12th, she said yes. And so I got her a script, but the others had already started memorizing because I had asked them to come to the first rehearsal memorized. So she was behind in the sense that she didn't have access to to study the material.
Of course.
Fortunately, from a rehearsal point of view, it worked out not too badly because she didn't come in until halfway through the play. So I was able to start at the beginning and work, towards the end and give Rosie a chance to catch up. But these actors were all seasoned. They're the two younger actors in the play are part of the Touchstone Theater's MFA program, so they have already had their college training. And I believe the gentleman who played Jimmy, the son, who we never saw, he was on the phone. It was a phone call. Is older and a seasoned actor, and the young woman playing Alicia, Crystal Hall, was a graduate of Muhlenberg College, which is where the playwright came from.
Oh, that's a cool connection.
So that was kind of interesting, that these things sort of all come together. My disappointment in terms of the production was we only had one performance. I would have liked to have had at least one more, because I think that the performance helps the actors, settle into the script. It was a challenging play to direct because it was talky.
Yes.
But I had to create a world for Walt where he was busy all the time, so the audience didn't see him as an invalid, but someone who could had some capacity to take care of himself.
Sure.
So he was changing the sprinkler and the hose, and he was picking up dead twigs and putting them in the garbage. So the language was almost incidental. It wasn't incidental, but I mean, it was. It wasn't center stage all the time. There was things
Right, there's a lot of motion,
movement,
a lot of activity, and because he's somewhat limited in his movement, he can't stand and carry a scene out. The young girl spent quite a bit of time seated at the table, but I told her to make it as animated as possible. So I staged it so he was on either side of her, so she was constantly shifting, which kept her open to the house and also energized her performance, which
Right.
was helpful.
Absolutely. Very neat. So what does the process look like for you in casting any works that you do?
I asked Touchstone to give me a list of actors that I could call in. The TD at Touchstone was wonderful to work with. Chris Edding, it was just great. I mean, he gave me some names. We called in a number of people. Well, I was fortunate to find Bill Joachim to do the Walt, the elderly guy. He was practically memorized when he came in, but he's on stage all the time. He doesn't leave the stage. So it's a very demanding role. So I think the play ran about 45 minutes. I think, the activity helped to move the play forward quite a bit, I think. And even the phone calls were entertaining. I mean, initially in the original script, the 30-year-old version, his son sent him tape recordings.
Oh.
So, I mean that's...
So you did modernize it a little bit.
More than a little. I mean...
with a full...
it actually improved it. You relied less on technology in order to pull that off.
Right.
Yes. When it comes to costume designs and setting up the set, who's in charge of that as a whole?
Well, typically in professional theater, you will have a production team that exists. That is the producers, the director, the set designer, costume designer, lighting and sound designer, and stage management. Stage management basically, does the scheduling, reminds people when they're being called and organizes that, plus is responsible for calling the show, backstage. So she operated the sound that was happening. There were very few sound cues to worry about. The lighting, we didn't have access to, a whole lot of lighting, but there was a general wash, and we were able even to squeeze in a gobo or two. The play takes place in May, or mid-spring, and in a suburban neighborhood, and in the backyard. I basically did the floor plan and called upon a friend of mine from Muhlenberg College, because John was one of his students. And I told him we were doing the play again, and would he be willing to give me some guidance in terms of a design. And I took him out to lunch, and he responded very positively to what I was doing, and it was helpful. It's what I needed. I mean, the floor treatment was AstroTurf. It was 15 by 20. And I wanted to do that. I was concerned about it looking too much like a putt-putt course or something. So, and he said he didn't think that would be a problem. And I was able to create 2 entrances and exits, which is what you needed. One was, from the yard, which I found an arbor that worked nicely. And then there was a stockade piece. It was 8 by 8. And that had been recently donated to Touchstone. And I thought it worked perfectly. I mean, I liked it because it was tall.
This is the tall fence piece. That
yes,
was in the back
because there were lines in the play that spoke about the house being a prison to the father, and so the stockade gave that feeling. Also, you wanted the place to an environment that was protected because the girl is looking for sanctuary. She's been in a bad relationship, ended up in the hospital, so she's looking for a place that's safe. And she's learning how to set boundaries for herself because she's been in this abusive relationship. So having a space that is protected, but also, recognizing for the old man that this would be he's limited in terms of what he can do because of the responsibilities he has towards the house. I thought all in all it came well, and then I always call on my wife, about there was a line in the play when Alicia, the young woman, comes to for an interview for the house, for the room for rent, says he says to her, "What are you doing here? I don't do surveys. I'm not interested in any Girl Scout cookies."
Yeah.
And I asked, my wife, I said, what about if I put her in she's a waitress. Yeah. So I put her in a white shirt and khaki pants, sort of a uniform, but gave her a vest, a short vest.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And it was green, and as part of her uniform, but it might have triggered his, why he said, "I am not interested in Girl
Scout cookies." Yeah, that makes sense now.
So I mean, she was the only one who had costume changes. I needed a robe for her because the daughter walks in on her in the shower, unbeknownst to the daughter that she thinks her father has left the water on in the shower.
Yeah.
She's scolding him from off stage. And the audience knows that the woman is taking a shower.
Right.
So they're just waiting for the moment when they see one another, who they both scream, and then the daughter comes out and, scolds her father. Wants to know what she's doing there and what have they been doing together.
Yes.
She immediately jumps to the conclusion that this is a more than just a casual acquaintance. And the daughter is not aware of the fact that the father has put in an ad in the paper for a room for rent, and he hasn't told his son either. So
Right.
he's avoiding, their negative response. I mean, he wants this because he needs to feel that he's making a difference. That he's connected to the community. Yeah. There's a lot of humor in the play, which was, I think humor from the playwright's point of view, I can say that I think the playwright feels that humor is survival. I mean, and all of these characters are suffering from a sense of loss. I mean, the wife has died in the last, within the decade. The son is doesn't live at home, moved away, a few states away, and is finding himself. He's got a dead-end job, and he's thinking of going to Costa Rica with a friend and just hang out. And the father is finding that unbelievable. The girl, of course, is looking for sanctuary, and she's just suffered a loss as far as a relationship. And the father is suffering a loss of independence. He doesn't drive anymore.
Right.
And, he's got his daughter who is trying to get him to reconsider where he's living and try to get him to move. And he wants nothing to do with going into assisted living, senior living facility. Yeah. And what I liked about this version on COVID making an important contribution to the play, one of the arguments has always been for people of an age to go into independent living, where the family can be secure, feel secure that they're being watched after. But under COVID, if you were in one of those facilities, it could have been a death sentence as well.
Absolutely.
And you certainly are isolated from your own family because they weren't allowed to come and visit you. So, I mean, that became an argument in the play, about the liberty, the freedom that you actually have in those facilities. So, I thought, the COVID, living in the time of COVID lent itself well to this, play. Yeah. And it wasn't overwritten. It was just...
No, it wasn't. It was not a very in-your-face part of it. But there was even a comment, I think, in part of the dialogue where the young woman that came to ask about the room for rent was wearing a mask, and he was sitting there and said, "I can't even hear you with that on. You can, if I'm vaccinated, you can take that off if you'd like."
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Well, overall, I thought the play was absolutely wonderful. The event was a great demonstration of access and accommodations in practice. And I just overall, it was really nice to either expose people to that, like you said,
yes,
or just to kind of see it in action. So that was wonderful.
I was glad that, we were telling a broader story, that it wasn't just about the guy with the disability. It was about the family.
Right.
Yeah.
And dealing with how this impacts one's family.
Absolutely.
It was funny because the daughter tells the father, she offers to have him live with her. He says she can't afford it. And she said, well, if you sell this house, some of this money could be used to putting in an apartment for you, just for you. And technically it would be coming out of our inheritance. And my brother is in the process of his son is putting on an addition to his house for his mom and dad to stay at. So it's very real. It's
something that people deal with all the time.
Right.
That decision to make.
Wonderful. Well, as we touched on lightly before, but has been a big part of your career, is you were the executive director at the Lehigh Valley Arts Council since 1999 until fairly recently retired.
Yes, this past January.
Yes. So congratulations.
Yes.
It was interesting. I saw on Facebook, it was an email or Facebook that came out, the job description came out today. At least I received it today. So I thought, well, it's about time they're getting around to, working things out. So.
Yeah. So that, in your career working there were many programs, many initiatives that came out of your time there. I know one of those, as you mentioned, was the Arts and Access Always program, which you are a very passionate, very fiery disability and arts advocate. So how did that come about, and what was the personal connection for you in all of that?
I think the personal connection was most immediately my Parkinson's, which doesn't impede on my ability to perform my duties as executive director. But like I said, it can be exhausting, and I didn't want to overstay my welcome as well. And but I think that, and my grandfather was an arthritic and was on crutches. And growing up with him, I would go there on weekends and watch him. So I grew up with this. I was very close to my grandfather. And my mom had a series of falls. She was in a brutal car accident that took place on my father's birthday and killed my grandmother and left my mom, severely wounded, and it took a while for her to recover. But it created in our household a different dynamic. I mentioned, I think there were 4 kids at the time I have. And we were all split up with various uncles and aunts. And then my father insisted we all be home for the weekend. And one of the treatments for my mom's leg, which had been busted in a number of places, they put a bone graft in. And the doctor said, that he felt that if she were to get pregnant, the bone graft would take much easier. That a woman naturally builds up calcium in her system when she's pregnant. So she did, and my youngest sister was born, who was named after my grandmother, Natalia. And so, it's been part of my life, so I think I was drawn to that. And doing Room for Rent was an ideal marriage of my passion for the theater and also my passion for disabilities. I'm convinced that, people need to recognize that this is not just about offering accommodations to people with disabilities, greater access to the arts, but it's offering access to opportunity in the arts, because just like every other segment of the population, there are people who are creative and want to express that creativity. And even if they're not pursuing it as a vocation, but just an avocation or just a class, they should have access to experiencing the arts, because I think the arts are a great way of expressing yourself. And I can't conceive of a world without them. So it was a natural segue from raising visibility to the value of the arts as far as the disability community. And it was easy for me to be passionate about it. I'm hoping that the Arts Council continues to espouse the value and offer programs to the community, and makes itself more visible in that regard. We managed since 1913 to do a fairly good job of, even in spite of COVID, which wreaked havoc on all the arts. And we're in a transitional time now. I don't believe we will return to normalcy. I think normalcy needs to be redefined. But I think, there's a need to expand diversity, be it people of color, be it people with disabilities. There's a need for the arts to be more relevant and less institutional and a barrier to participation.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We've talked at length about just increasing, whether it be increasing accommodations or lowering barriers to the arts, isn't just as a benefit to individuals with disabilities. It really does benefit everyone.
Well, they're stories. They're great stories to be told,
right.
And, there isn't a family that doesn't have a relative or a neighbor who doesn't have a disability. So, I went to school years ago when people were being hidden from the public. Now with inclusion in schools, there's a greater regard for serving this population. And so they should be served.
Yes,
absolutely. In terms of your career, going from a professional practicing artist, kind of transitioning into arts administrator and now back into this director artist role. What does that look like, and how has that kind of changed your perspective on the arts?
Well, it's all about time. How many hours in the day are there? When I took on the position at the Arts Council, there was no time for me to do theater. I mean, theater is very demanding. It's takes over. I mean, at least it takes me over when I'm involved in it. And the hours, you have to be flexible, even if it's a union contract and stuff. I mean, you have to be there, So, once I retired, it was easy for me not easy, but it became, an opportunity that I could create for myself.
Right.
And I believe wholeheartedly that no matter what art discipline or art form you're involved in, as an artist, you have to be involved in creating opportunities for yourself. There's nobody out there waiting to looking to discover you.
Right.
You have to create the opportunities. And you have to be flexible in terms of your expectations as well. There's no perfect out there. So, you want to make sure that, and you also want to make sure you're surrounding yourself with people you respect. I think that's important as well.
Absolutely. This has come up over the course of our many episodes, of course, that the arts in general aren't always necessarily seen as, how shall I phrase this? You touched upon it with a parent that was hesitant to expose his children to music, or parents are hesitant to send their kids to art, to college for an art degree. But I think that there is such a stigma around the arts there's not opportunity for that to be a real profession. And myself as a young arts administrator, I think that that's been something that has been said over and over again, not necessarily by my parents, but just as people see what I was working to get my degree towards or whatever. But the one thing that you mentioned that was really interesting is Actors Equity and the Screen Actors Guild. And I was wondering if you could speak just a little bit to the importance of professional community surrounding people that work in the arts, because there are amazing resources out there, like Americans for the Arts has been a great resource to me, and many, many other things. But how has that benefited you as an artist and an arts administrator?
Well, because they, create the contracts under which the producing theater will hire you. There are certain size standard contracts, a letter of agreement, theater companies are defined by Lord A, Lord B, C, and D. D being the smallest, and A being the largest. And there's a level of contractual responsibility in terms of payment. That's set by the contract, and it could be negotiated higher, I guess, if you have that kind of clout. But one of the fascinating things is when you read about celebrities who take a role on Broadway, they're not getting the money they're accustomed to getting from a movie. But they're doing it because they're learning, they're honing their craft, and a film is such a director's medium and a technical medium, whereas stage is the actor's medium, because they're in the live moment at the time.
Right.
There's nobody controlling them over the microphone or earphone telling them where to go and what to do. They're in the moment and they're creating that reality.
That's an interesting distinction to think about, the actor's medium versus not the actor's medium, in a film where there's opportunity to cut or pause, versus something that's live and you can do it all in one run and then it's done kind of thing. That's interesting. As you mentioned before, you have operated as an artist and administrator in the Lehigh Valley for a long time. So can you speak a little bit to the state of the arts in the Lehigh Valley and what that looks like?
Well, I think the state of the arts in the Lehigh Valley probably is similar to the state of the arts across the nation. There were a number of theaters and symphonies and dance companies, that have been hard hit by COVID because they were not allowed to perform. And so their basic business model, they're not selling tickets. They're, and in live theater and live performance, generally they say that the cost of the ticket only pays for 50% of the cost of, putting the play on. So there's great challenges all over. And we still have a lot of work to do in terms of advocacy, for people recognizing the value and the importance, not only in terms of the professional arts realm, but also for arts in the schools, because this is where they learn about the arts is in school, and there's a familiarity if they get engaged and involved, regardless of whether they pursue it as a vocation or not. They're learning from the experience. I mean, I often thought that directing was a great way to course in arts administration. I mean, my family was in the restaurant business, so I worked in the restaurant business for a number of years. If you're doing a big party and there's a lot of different components, putting all that together is very similar to organizing a play and working with a team of people and getting it done. So, I mean, the arts, they also teach you how to, theater anyways, teaches you how to work with other people, towards a common goal. And I think that's an invaluable experience. So, I mean, going out into the workaday world these days is not about, I mean, I know there are a lot of people working from home, but I mean, I gotta believe that, at the sacrifice of much live creativity and engagement with each other, because they didn't have an opportunity to engage live with their colleagues when they were working at home. Though I give, the arts organization much credit for exploring different ways of using technology and the various media to host meetings and to host public events and, even artistic events, And, I mean, it's a process of how you use the tools to create something imaginatively. So I think the arts are important for education. It also teaches you about other cultures.
Absolutely.
And, we're a multicultural nation in spite of what politicians would like to see. I mean, we are a country built on immigrants. And they come with different cultural biases, and we learn from their. I mean, we did a residency in the Arts Council, and I say we, years ago, which had to do with the story of Cinderella, and it was done at a school in Allentown, and there were 5 versions of it, the story, because there was a version of Cinderella in the Hispanic culture. There's one in the Asian culture. There's a story of Cinderella and a lot of different, and you can see the similarities. And that's a great way of teaching tolerance, to recognize that there's a lot that we share from people who are different than we are.
I'll ask a question that I definitely know the answer to, and I know how you'll answer, but because it's been a point of contention over the last however many years, What is the importance of federally supported, state supported, agency supported arts funding for the arts, whether it be for art education or for public art initiatives?
Well, I think in the same way that having a membership in the Actors Equity or the Screen Actors Guild validates my professional status as an artist, the securing a federal grant carries some clout with it. You have to find matching dollars, but it's also a federal grant, which is not easy to come by. And if you can bring one into your community, you're in a position then to find matching funds, maybe from a funder that you've never approached before. I think what I'm not certain about in terms of the future of the arts in the Lehigh Valley or across the nation is how do you sustain a company over time? We don't need to have a theater for every art organization that exists. And arts organizations tend to, in my opinion, in times of stress, they tend to feel they need to do more to validate themselves, and they get burned out very quickly. I think we need to find ways of sharing space and sharing opportunities. I think we need to try and influence trustees and foundations and members of the corporate community. We need to influence them in having people of color and people with disabilities serve in the capacity and decision-making so that people recognize that, this is important to all people, regardless of their race or their abilities, that there should be equal access to the arts. I mean, it's a civil right. And, the Americans with Disabilities Act is over 30 years old. And there's a lot of organizations that are not providing access in the way that they could. But they need some seed money to do that as well. And I think that's something that the community could be involved in terms of advocacy for greater understanding and awareness of the value of the arts in people's lives. Nora Suggs, who's the executive director for Satori, which is a small chamber orchestra, did a workshop during the Arts and Access Year of Celebration. And she wrote in her evaluation of it that she was honored to work with these kids. She felt she learned more from them than she taught them. And that was a wonderful review that she had given to that experience. And she saw them turned on by the music. I mean, while they played, they were invited to come and lay their hands on the vibrate and feel the vibrations of the instruments and such. And so there are a lot of stories to be told, and there's a lot of friendships and partnerships to be made.
Absolutely.
And it's fun knowing who you're performing for. It's a different I haven't acted in a number of years, but when I was acting and I was cast in a production that had the actors surrounding the stage, and then they would enter from a scene from that point of view and just assume the character and play the role. Typically in situations like that, you tend to greet the audience as they're coming in and you're hanging out on this around the stage, and that's kind of fun, so you see who it is you're performing for.
Right.
It becomes much more of a intimate experience. It's very much a shared experience.
Absolutely.
So
So, Randall, as a takeaway for our listeners, and this is a very opinionated question, but what is one takeaway, one thing somebody could do to be a better arts advocate?
Well, I think you should attend events. I think you should attend events, and you might, if you're not a performer or a participant, you could volunteer and get to know the group and the people that are associated with the group. Because I think when you fall in love or you're attracted to a group that you really like and it excites you, then that will motivate you to write a letter or make an appeal. I forget what show I was watching. I guess it was Morning Joe this morning. It was the Day of the Girl, day of some national holiday, or international. And they had this young woman who had started a project. Her project was trying to raise money for people who were going bankrupt from their COVID condition and situation. And it was put on hold when COVID was in full bloom and people in schools were not teaching kids in the classrooms. And she went ahead and continued with it, using the tools that COVID sort of provided. And she raised a tremendous amount of money. And this was a 16-year-old girl. I mean, and she was highly articulate. So it's not an impossibility. And I think when you tell people how much the arts mean to you, then they will recognize the value of it. I mean, I don't think we let people know. And I also think you need to say thank you. I mean, I think it's important that you respect the person you're asking the funds from.
Absolutely,
even if it's an elected official, I mean, and it's taxpayer dollars. The fact that you received a grant is deserving of a thank you. And that, and you invite that legislator to your events and recognize them in the audience, when they attend, so that the community recognizes that we're all in this together.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, Randall, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. It was fun.
And for sharing your story. We really appreciate it.
Sure. Nice to meet you, too.
You too.
And that was our conversation with Randall Forte. Randall, thank you so much for coming in. And here's Elizabeth with our opportunity for the week.
Currently exhibiting at Penn State Lehigh Valley's Ronald K. DeLong Gallery is Jason Travers, Documenting the Moment, A Visual Journey. This show was curated by our former podcast guest and gallery director at Penn State Lehigh Valley, Ann Lawlick. The show runs from September 7th to December 17th. It is free and open to the public. You can find more information by visiting Penn State Lehigh Valley's website at lehighvalley.psu.edu/gallery. Thanks for tuning in to the Lehigh Valley Arts Podcast, a Steel Pixel original series. Don't forget to like the podcast, leave us a review, and follow us on both social media and streaming services at Lehigh Valley Arts Podcast.